Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. We are broadcasting live from CES 2018, and it's been a great time here at CES. And as I said, we are still going strong here despite some of the power outages. The good thing is the Peggy Smedley Show is still live. And right now I want to welcome Alex Manea. He is the Chief Security Officer at Blackberry. And Alex, we had a great time doing a session here at CES earlier this week. And so I'm glad that you're able to join me on the radio show.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me, Peggy.
Well, so now you've been here in the North Tower, you were over at Central where the power went out, so fortunately You haven't had to deal with that.
Yep, no, the power outage kind of threw us all off, but we're still going here, so that's the important part.
Well, the good news is, it's been kind of funny, we were saying ignore the media coverage that we're seeing outside of CES, because they're saying that CES is not going, so I've been saying to anyone watching, ignore that, we're still here.
CES is still going strong, we're still
going
good.
strong, and that's a good thing. So let's talk about what you've been seeing. I mean, you've been in this business for a long time. You know, both from a security perspective, a technology perspective, what's your take on how we've been evolving? I think you see a lot of exciting things, and when we were doing the panel, we talked about how the Internet of Things are evolving, and you've been around. What excites you the most these days?
So I think first and foremost, CES is a really cool place to see what's evolving and to see kind of the latest and greatest technology. And it's been neat because I've been at CES for about the past 10 years or so I've seen a lot of evolution in terms of the technologies here. What I love these days is that there's so many innovative IoT technologies out there, right? So many different types of smart home appliances, personal wearables, smart kitchens, automotive stuff. I mean, there's so much cool technology here. And I really think that CES is showing the evolution of IoT and how IoT is really starting to mature and really starting to provide value to consumers.
And looking at that, Blackberry has really evolved. You know, you guys have been involved in the automotive space, you made the acquisition of QNX, and that's really showed where you guys have done some really innovative things where, and I'm going to be candid, you know, people have said, is Blackberry not in this? Are they out of this? But Blackberry has really stepped up and said, we understand from an underlying perspective what this industry and the Internet of Things is really all about.
Yep.
And that's what's interesting. And you, from a security perspective, must say, not only do we understand it, but we understand how to make sure things are secure and make sure things are running well, because I think sometimes we get involved and we bring products to market despite not knowing how to make sure they're not going to be hacked. And someone like you who's from a security side of it says, that's my #1 priority.
Yeah, and I think that's really what gives us a big advantage in this market is, if you think about it, even when we were a mobile phone company, we were first and foremost still a security company, right? We were making mobile phones that were the most secure in the world. And so what we've done over the past couple of years is we've evolved from being a mobile device manufacturer to being a software and security company, really helping to serve the enterprise of things. So all of the different things connecting to the enterprise, whether that be desktops or laptops or mobile devices, whether it's iOS or Android, or even IoT endpoints, so things like automotive, for instance. And so it's been a really natural evolution for us because we've always focused on security, and we've taken all the things that we've learned about security from the mobile space and really applied them to the IoT space.
Let's talk about that. What do you think has been the biggest challenge for Blackberry? It's not only what Blackberry's doing, but you've done it really well with partnerships. And I think that's where you excel in a lot of ways, because I think, I don't know if you would consider this, but in some ways I think you're agnostic with a lot of partners. You say, we go to market and we partner with a lot of people, where everybody else says, this is the way we go, and it makes it a little bit challenging for them because you have to pick someone.
Yeah.
You guys go to market and say, look, we're there and we partner with a lot of people, and that's what makes us, I think, somewhat unique.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the evolution of Blackberry, right? If you think about where Blackberry was 10 years ago, we were making everything ourselves. We were making the device ourselves, the operating system ourselves, the control ourselves. These days, it's all about ecosystems, right? And in order to participate and be part of the ecosystem and be the platform for the ecosystem, we have to partner with others. So automotive is a great example, where automotive is such a complex ecosystem. It's not just the car manufacturers. You have all the tier 1 suppliers, all of the different parts of the ecosystem. And so what we're doing is we're just basically going around and becoming platform agnostic. We're saying, we want to help you secure your cars, we want to help you secure your enterprise, and we're willing to partner with anyone who wants our help doing that.
Automotive has become a really tricky space right now. I think everybody wants in it, and I think it's becoming so complex that we're talking about autonomous vehicles. Where are we truly when we talk about autonomous cars? Are we there? What level are we? We say we're going to have autonomous cars on the market. Where are we, and when are we really going to get there?
So I think the key thing to understand about autonomous cars is it's not a binary thing, right? A lot of people still think about it as, is my car self-driving or not? The reality is that almost every high-end car these days in the market has some level of autonomy, or at least some level of driver assistance, right? And if you think about it, in many ways as consumers, we're starting to get used to that. We're starting to get used to the concept of, hey, my car is going to tell me when I'm driving too close to the car in front of me, or it's going to help me keep my lanes, or it's going to help me park my car. And a lot of people don't realize that is in some ways a form of autonomy. Now, in terms of when are self-driving cars really going to be on the road, it's going to be a step-by-step process, right? So there's going to be, first and foremost, we're going to see cars become more self-driving in urban environments, and environments where we kind of know what to expect. But if you think about like full level 5 autonomy, for instance, I wouldn't expect that to be around for at least another 10, 20 years, because realistically, we're going to have to put a lot more technology in the car for the car to be able to drive itself in a rural environment and be able to detect all the things it needs to detect.
Everybody, you talk to Tesla and they go, hey, we're already there. You get in our cars, you can go from Palo Alto to the office and back to the grocery store. How is that possible then? Somebody hears that and they go, well, those cars are already on the street. Is that really what's happening? Or you say, well, they're testing it out, but we've got so much before two cars can make decisions together on the road. So when somebody watching this goes, I'm so confused on what that really means.
Well, and what we're starting to see now is autonomous cars being on the road and interacting with human drivers, right? And if you look at kind of the long-term vision of autonomy, it's eventually going to get to the point where pretty much all the cars are on the road are autonomous. And at that point, that's kind of really the cool long-term vision, because then the cars can actually start communicating with each other. So imagine, for instance, that my autonomous vehicle is going down the road and all of a sudden the traffic stops and it has to hit the brakes really quickly. At that point, there's a new technology called vehicle-to-vehicle communication, where it can actually beam out a signal to the other cars on the road, basically saying, hey, you're going to have to put on a hard brake, make sure you're ready for this, right? So again, autonomy is not a binary thing. It's going to continue evolving, but the long-term vision, in my opinion, is very exciting, because ultimately when everyone's driving self-driving cars, that's going to make traffic a lot more efficient, and that's going to make us a lot more productive.
When we talk about all of these things, and we've had guests on this week that we're talking about the cars. At what point are we really going to be talking about that vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infrastructure that really has to occur, that's going to be the big push? And I don't know that we've really made that big leap yet.
No.
To say what the infrastructure has to be to really make this happen for the lights, the things around us, before we're really doing it.
And that's a great point, because a lot of people talk about vehicle to vehicle, but in my opinion, vehicle to infrastructure becomes even more important there. Because if you think about how cars do self-driving these days, in many ways they're trying to imitate how humans drive. So for instance, I'm driving my car up to an intersection, the car basically sees that it's a stoplight, but as humans we can instinctively say, heuristically, okay, that's a red light, that's a stoplight. The car essentially has to do real-time image processing and has to basically detect that as a stoplight, and that's actually very data intensive and processing intensive for the car. Eventually where we want to go to with V2I is where the stoplight is essentially beaming out a signal basically saying, hey, I'm a stoplight, you need to stop, you need to stop. And at that point, our vehicles become a lot more efficient, and we have a lot safer roads, because of the fact that the vehicles and the humans no longer have to make that judgment. They're basically just listening to the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is telling them what to do.
Are we now talking about not only sensors in the road, but video sensors that have to now communicate? And we're really having two forms of what kind of sensors are going to have to give and provide that data at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other big question there as well is security and authentication, right?
And that's what I was going to
So
get
if I'm a bad actor, for instance, what stops me from pretending to be a stoplight, right? And essentially just creating gridlock across the road, especially if the road is full of autonomous vehicles. And so that's one area that we're really focused on from a Blackberry standpoint, is basically how do we create a hardware root of trust within the chipset to really be able to authenticate all all of those different commands and be able to say, yes, this is really Peggy's car, and yes, this is really a stoplight authenticated by the city of Las Vegas, so that to make sure that the two are communicating properly.
So are we at that point talking about we need all digital embedded type things here? Are we talking a combination of analog and digital to make all of this work? What are we talking about? Because in some of this, we're talking about roads, which would be more analog versus, and video, which is more digital. So we're really talking about
well, so long term, it's ultimately going to be all digital, right? But when I say long term, I'm not talking 10, 20 years, I'm talking 30, 40 years.
Yeah, now we're really moving out there.
But you have to kind of think about the fact that there's going to be a transition period. Yep, okay. Exactly. And also the transition isn't going to happen overnight, and it's going to happen in certain places faster than others. So if you think about a place like New York City, for instance, I would expect that to have the infrastructure in place faster than maybe rural Montana, right? In rural Montana, we might not necessarily have to make the investments right away to put that infrastructure in place, which puts more onus on the car manufacturers to really be able to, in many ways, program the cars to imitate the way human drivers drive, whereas in a place like New York City, if we have the right infrastructure, at that point we can code the cars to communicate directly with the infrastructure and be a lot more efficient than how human drivers work.
And the challenge, though, is you can't have a car that says, I'm going to drive from New York to Montana, that I can't have that car to be able to do that. So those are the challenges that the manufacturers have to be thinking about, because that one car is going to drive from one city, one state to the other. It has to be able to do that.
Yeah, I liken it a lot to kind of the evolution of how we've evolved chess playing computers, right? So I grew up as a chess player, for instance, and when I was growing up, humans were better than computers. And one of the big kind of turning points was when Deep Blue, written by IBM, was able to beat Garry Kasparov, who was the best human player at the time. But what was interesting was when we first coded computers were basically brute forcing the problem. They were basically trying to go through every single possible move combination and look at it in terms of the entire tree. Human chess players don't do that. Human chess players use heuristics. They intrinsically can look at a position and say, okay, these are the 5 to 10 moves that I think are the best chances, so I'm going to keep looking down there. And when computers were able to start using those human-style heuristics, they all of a sudden leapfrogged humans, and now computers can play chess way, way better than humans. I think that's going to happen with self-driving vehicles. The more self-driving vehicles can start using these road heuristics similar to humans, and the more they can start communicating with infrastructure, they're eventually going to become better drivers than humans.
What do you think, looking at all of this, are we going to get to a point that we will ever say we're going to be able to be better than the bad actors, or we are just always going to be playing cat and mouse? It's always going to be a cat and mouse because they're going to be out there and we're going to always try to be one step ahead of them. I mean, we just have to get to that point where we know, as a chief security officer, you know that you're always going to have to be fighting those guys and gals who are out there.
Well, so the thing to understand about security is it's fundamentally an unfair game, right? The bad actors have a huge advantage. All they need to find is one vulnerability. So security, just like self-driving cars, it's not a binary thing. It's not about being perfectly secure. It's about how do we close that gap? Because right now, honestly, the gap is way too big. The gap between what we're doing in terms of security and what the bad actors can do is way too big, and that's why we're seeing large-scale hacks like the WannaCrys of the world, like the NotPetches of the world. And I think we're going to keep seeing that until we as an industry start really increasing our security standards, especially when it comes to IoT. So I think we're going to be able to close that gap. We're never going to be 100% secure, but if we can get close enough, at that point we have a reasonable level of security to protect ourselves.
When we look at this right now, one of the interesting things, you have to think like a bad actor sometimes. Does it frustrate you, or does it help you to have to think like that, to go, what makes them tick in some ways?
So for me, it actually really helps me. I have a background in working with a lot of hackers, so in some ways I kind of have that hacker mindset, and you make a really great point in that, hackers fundamentally think in different ways than normal people, than security people. So think about something like an Xbox. If I put an Xbox in front of you, you're like, oh cool, an Xbox, I want to play some video games. If you put an Xbox in front of a hacker, that hacker is probably going to think something along the lines of, hey, I wonder if I can put Linux on this and if I can start downloading stuff, right? So hackers fundamentally think about security in a different way, and the more we can think about it like they do, and the more we can understand how they think, the better we can protect ourselves. And we do a lot of that at Blackberry. We actually work with a lot of hackers. We actually hire white hat hackers internally For us, we find it's really important to work with hackers and work with the hacking community, because we don't believe that most hackers are really bad people. Most hackers, quite honestly, they're just very interested and they like to fool around and they like to hack things for fun.
And that's an interesting point, because not all of them, it's just the way they think is different. They're just thinking, I want to actually reinvent that in a different way. And so that mindset is, we had this conversation on the panel is, before there was programs and things like that, what were they taking apart,
Yep.
in that concept. So is that what we're having to look at here? Because we have to look at that for everything, for healthcare, for automotive, for every industry that we're thinking about. We have to think differently because of protecting the safety of everyone.
Well, and I think that's a great point too, because the stakes are fundamentally changing. So if you think about what happens if somebody hacks your computer or your phone, ultimately they're threatening your privacy, they're threatening your data, they're threatening your personal information. If somebody hacks your car, if somebody hacks your home camera, at that point they're potentially threatening your personal safety, right? And I don't want to sound like Chicken Little here, but we are literally talking about, in some cases, life or death situations. I've seen, for instance, hacks on insulin pumps, right? Infusion pumps. At that point, you can literally start messing with people's health. And I think that's where, as a society, we really need to look at that and look at how do we improve our security standards to protect against those new types of threats, which are naturally going to come into play with IoT.
When we look at the big picture right now, and it's interesting that you talk about this, what's the most impressive innovation that you see? Because right now, one of the things I like to talk about is inspiring our next generation, because right now you're excited about what this is, but it's not just, and this is what I like to ask my guests, it's not just about what we do today, but it's about the next 10 years we do, and it's inspiring the youth, both men and women, to
Yep.
really stay excited about what we're doing and to say we have to get them to think about what we're doing and where we're going. How do you want to inspire that next generation to keep thinking about what the future is going to be, even though we don't know what the future is?
Well, I think from a security standpoint, the big thing we all need to get better at is becoming more proactive, right? Right now, security in many cases is very reactive. We wait until we get hacked, and then we kind of react to that. So part of becoming more proactive is about deploying better platforms and better standards, but part of it as well is about how do we leverage things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to stay one step ahead of the attackers, right? How can we basically look at different types of attack patterns and detect attacks before they even happen? Because the reality is most hacks don't come out of nowhere. Most hacks have a relatively predictable pattern where the hackers will actually examine the network for, in some cases, weeks or even months in advance. If we start seeing hackers poking around our networks, at that point we can throw up a yellow flag or a red flag saying, hey, we're seeing a lot of interesting traffic from this weird IP address halfway across the world. Maybe we should start locking down some of that traffic before we really start seeing a lot of problems. So I think that's really the future of security, is becoming more proactive.
One of the things that we kind of say with a lot of things we have to do is it is about regulation. Do we think we need more regulation? Do we not need regulation? What is it that requires us to start looking at these kind of things that we say going forward? I mean, it's one of those things, you don't want more regulation, you want to have more freedom to be able to do things, but in some instances it's something we keep, we mentioned it too about Senator Mackey coming up with some of the things he did. What do you think we need to do?
So I do think for IoT, for instance, we do need a little bit more regulation, right? Because IoT right now is kind of the wild, wild west.
That's to say the least, right?
Well, and I'll give you a simple example, right? A lot of the IoT devices, even here at CES, they have no way of receiving software updates. And that scares the heck out of me, because I can tell you, working in security, as soon as you take something and you connect it to the internet, hackers are going to start looking for vulnerabilities in the code. And if you have enough code and you leave it on the internet for long enough, it's almost guaranteed the hackers will find those vulnerabilities. So no matter how secure your system is when you first deploy it, you need to be able to update it. I personally believe that we should have mandates that say that you must have the ability to push software updates to every single IoT device as a minimum, right? And that, to me, is a regulation that makes a lot of sense, because at that point we can protect ourselves against future threats. If we start deploying IoT devices and we can't update the software, as soon as we find vulnerabilities in them, what are we going to do? Are we going to go to the consumers and say, sorry, you can't use your home security camera anymore? That becomes very, very difficult. Whereas if we can start deploying IoT devices with those software updates, we can at least update those things and patch them rather than having those vulnerabilities around forever.
Isn't that part of the problem, that we've kind of brought products to market without, we kind of developed them backwards. We brought products out with not ensuring that there was some security in them.
Well, and I think part of it is a mindset issue, right? People need to realize that security is not a feature, it's a core property of a product. And you can't add security in version 2, right? A lot of people have this mindset of, oh, well, let's just get the product out to market, let's see how it does, and then we'll add security later. Well, I can tell you, having spent 8 years in product management, we'll add it later is often code for, it's probably not coming. So, but even if we do add it later, we still get into the software update issue of, okay, version 2 has security, best case scenario. There's still N number of products with version 1 software out there, and if there's no way to update that software, at that point the hackers are just going to hack the version 1 software.
What do you see now? Look into the future right now, and you see what BlackBerry's excited about. What are some of the things down the road that you guys are really excited that you're working on?
Well, obviously we're very excited about the IoT. I don't want to sound like I'm being negative about IoT, because personally I love the IoT. I'm excited to not have to drive my car eventually. I'm excited about IoT. But at the same time, one of the things to understand about IoT is that right now we're kind of throwing stuff at the fridge and seeing what sticks, right? When it comes to IoT, there's so many solutions out there, and one of the questions becomes, okay, are all of these solutions really providing a lot of value to the consumer? And we're particularly excited about automotive when it comes to IoT, because automotive is something that's just a slam dunk. When I connect my car to the internet, I'm instantly getting value as a consumer. I can get mapping data, I can get driving directions, I can get all of these different things to my car, so we believe that automotive is going to become one of the key use cases of IoT. We believe healthcare is going to be there, we believe finance is going to be there. In terms of, is every use case that we're seeing here at CES still going to be around 5-10 years from now? I'm not convinced it is, but at the same time, I still love seeing the innovation here, and I still love seeing all the cool products.
So are we really talking about, when we talk about IoT, everybody kind of tags on these other acronyms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, all these things, now blockchain. What are those things right now that you say really have an impact and influence and drive the Internet of Things?
Well, I think big data is something that's already there today, right?
Because you have to have the data that really is behind the Internet of Things.
And it's interesting, because one of the things we talked about in the panel is, I think the problem is becoming less and less data collection and more data processing, right? I don't think there's any lack of big data right now. I don't think there's any lack of large-scale providers having data on their consumers. It really comes down to, how do we take all that data and how do we translate it into something that provides the consumer value? Right?
So services, things that they can actually use and incorporate what they need.
Just because I know everything about you doesn't mean that I can necessarily help you in your life. But if I can help you in your life, at that point you want to buy my product. So I think big data becomes very, very important. When I look at things like AI and machine learning, those are more long-term things. Those are not necessarily things that we're seeing really being put into practice in wide-scale practice today, but they definitely have a huge amount of potential for the future.
We talk about blockchain. Are we really going to see blockchain in every vertical? Are we going to see every vertical saying, I'm going to develop these like in manufacturing and utilities? Is that something, or right now, big word acronym is blockchain as a service? Or are we just leapfrogging that and saying, it's just something, we're just not quite there yet, but let's wait. Let's really figure out how to really incorporate the Internet of Things. We're just jumping too fast.
So as a tech guy, as a nerd, I love blockchain. I love the concept of blockchain. But as a former product manager, I believe that blockchain is in many ways a solution looking for a problem right now. It's a very cool solution for things like cryptocurrency, but we really haven't seen blockchain being applied in large scale to other types of solutions. And I think part of it is, I see a big misunderstanding when it comes to blockchain, and that a lot of people think of blockchain as really this privacy enhancing, privacy protecting data. Well, the reality is blockchain is a public ledger, right? So blockchain, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily protect privacy. Blockchain is basically about having that public record of everything that's happening. Now, what problems does that actually solve? I think the market's still trying to figure that out right now. Again, I love the technology, But other than cryptocurrency, I don't know what other problems it's really solving, at least in the short term.
From a security perspective, I love to ask someone who really understands this. Is it really that secure? Is that, people say it can't be hacked. I just have a hard time believing it can't be hacked.
Nothing can't be hacked.
I love hearing that. That's true. That's what I say.
And that is always the case with anything. Nothing is unhackable. I do think that blockchain, the designers of blockchain have done a fantastic job from a crypto standpoint. But at the same time, what I do worry about is because it's being used for things like Bitcoin, and because Bitcoin is worth whatever it's worth these days, tens of thousands of dollars, there is a huge amount of incentive to try to hack it. So I know there's hackers around the world looking at blockchain, trying to figure out what is that vulnerability, and that concerns me, because if they do find a wide-scale vulnerability within blockchain, at that point, people could literally lose millions of dollars. So again, nothing is unhackable. But the fact that blockchain has survived this long without any major hacks, obviously there's been some minor like crypto wallet hacks, things like that. We've seen DDoS attacks on some of the Bitcoin exchanges, but we haven't really seen a fundamental flaw in blockchain. So the fact that so many people have looked at it for, let's say, 5 years and they haven't hacked it yet means it's pretty good.
So now let's talk about you personally. Let's talk about the Canada Game Show. I mean, you know, we got to ask everybody who wants to know about it. Says we got to get to know about you personally. I mean, now we've talked about all the fun stuff, but we got to get to know Alex personally, because, you know, I couldn't let you go off the show without talking about it.
Fair enough. Sure. So I was on a game show called Canada's Smartest Person a couple years back. And
what made you be on the game show, first of all?
Oh goodness, so the story's kind of wacky. Essentially what happened was, so the game show was, there's a companion app that you can download on your mobile device to basically play along with the game show. So in terms of the game show itself, think of it kind of like Jeopardy, but it's less trivia questions and more kind of like IQ tests, but different types of IQ tests. And so I watched the first season on TV and I played along on my app at home, and I did pretty well, and the producers noticed me. So they said, hey, do you want to come on the second season? And so I got to come on the second season, got to be on national Canadian TV, which was a blast. And I got to do everything from painting to giving a live public speech on the show. I had to do some math problems. I had to do all sorts of wacky stuff. And I ended up winning my episode, which was pretty cool. And it was fun.
So you really wanted to do this. Here's a guy who's as smart as you said, I want to be on a wacky game show. What just drew you to say, you know what, I think I want to be on a Canadian game show?
You know what, I'm a competitive guy. I like to compete, and I just wanted to see, you know, can I compete against some of the smartest people in Canada? And it was just a ton of fun. And as a bonus, I got to learn a lot about TV, how game shows are made, those types of things. And it was just, honestly, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
So now we know the next time we have a competition, we're calling you, Alex. We're putting you on.
I'm in.
All right, I love it. Well, Alex, we're out of time. Tell our listeners where they can learn more about what Blackberry's doing.
Sure, absolutely. So if you want to learn more about Blackberry, you can go to blackberry.com. That's our website. If you want to learn about our enterprise products, blackberry.com/enterprise. And if you're here at CES, make sure you visit us. We have a great booth in the North Hall, booth number 7523, and that's Blackberry QNX. We're showing off an Aston Martin. We're showing off a Range Rover. We're showing off amazing cars. So if you're at CES, make sure you drop by our booth.
Want to see nice cars? There you go. Alex, thank you for joining us. I really enjoyed it. All right, well, we're out of time, so stick around. We've got more to come. You can tweet at us at ConnectedWMag, and you can ask any questions you want. You can even ask Alex maybe some game show questions. Who knows? So, all right, well, this is the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and relevant technology. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. We'll be right back.